So from Romans 1 to 4, this is what we've been covering in the past few weeks in our Bible studies. And it's something that we can kind of term judicial redemption. And so judicial redemption is not a new concept nor a new idea, but it's a way for us to conceptualize and kind of categorize all that Paul is speaking about from Romans 1 to 4. And this includes all that Christ has accomplished for us on the death on this cross. So it's judicial because it's dealing with, in a legal sense, our righteousness or our unrighteousness. And it's a redemption, right? Because God sent his Son as the price for us to be bought back to him. So we are redeemed. But we see, in Romans 1 through 4, this judicial redemption is really rich, right? It comes all the way in our experience from when we were unbelievers under God's condemnation, but it brings us all the way to the point where we are reconciled to God. We have peace toward God, and we are born again. Right? It's quite amazing, just by our believing into what he's done, we are justified.
Amen.
But then we come to Romans 5 in our experience, and Paul says that much more we will be saved in his life. Actually, let's just read Romans 5:10 under Roman numeral 1. For if we, being enemies, were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, much more we will be saved in his life, having been reconciled. So actually, Paul is saying much more in comparison to judicial redemption. Paul is saying much more in comparison to all that was accomplished on Christ's death on the cross. So what is Paul saying is so much more? I guess one way to lead into this is a common question that I think a lot of believers have, and that is, how come I'm saved, but sometimes in my experience, I feel like I fall short of Christ living. Right? We read about our salvation and we receive so much. Right? In Romans 5:5 it says, the love of God has been poured out in our hearts. So the love of God was made available to us in our salvation. But then sometimes, in my own experience, it's like, sometimes I do feel this love, a love that is definitely deeper than what I can have just by myself. But then, sometimes my housemates maybe don't do their chores. Or sometimes, I'm supposed to have a meal with someone and they cancel that, right? Then the love kind of turns into frustration. I don't feel like I'm not really matching Christ in that frustration. So why is there this disparity? I'm saved, right? I've been saved. And it's because Paul has a much more salvation to talk about. And we can call this organic salvation. Right? So just like judicial redemption is just kind of a term to help us conceptualize what Romans 1 through 4 is about, we can say organic salvation is the way for us to think about what Paul is talking about from Romans 5 all the way until the end of Romans. And what's important about organic salvation is that it's unlike judicial redemption in the sense that it's a process. It's not just simply a one-time thing where we believe into the Lord and then that's it, right? Our salvation has been completed in that sense. But this salvation is actually, after our judicial redemption, we have a little bit of Christ's life put into us, right? Christ's very life is actually put into our being. But this life needs to grow. And the other things in our being need to be dealt with. And that's organic salvation. And I can just read under point B, number 2, the organic salvation is the growth of the divine life that we receive after we are saved. And this life saves us from all the negative aspects of our being. So in Romans 5, it talks about saving us from sin. In Romans 6, eventually it will talk about saving us from something called our old man. And then later on in the coming chapters, it talks about being saved from the world, being saved from individualism, divisiveness. That will all be coming in the coming Bible studies. But for now, maybe some of us haven't even heard of half of these terms before. We can just consider in our own being then, in our own experience, what are some of the things that we feel like we still need to be saved from? And that's what organic salvation saves us from.